Let's move to KwaZulu-Natal for the latest on what's going on with the Zulu royal throne. The High Court in Pietermaritzburg has dismissed a challenge to the Zulu crown. This opens the way for the coronation of King Zulu Zwelithini. Judge Isaac Madondo has, however, granted an interdict preventing the execution of the late king's will. This is to allow time to make sure the signature on the will was not forged. Let's discuss this now with Professor Sihawukele Ngubani. He's a professor of African languages at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor, thank you so much for your time. So the court today has confirmed that Zulu is indeed the rightful king. Are you satisfied that the courts and Zulu custom have aligned properly on this issue?
Yes, I think we welcome, and thank you for inviting me. We welcome the judgment, and we feel that justice has prevailed. And the judge, the Deputy Chief Justice Madondo, has aligned the tradition with the legislation using the customary law. So I'm quite satisfied with the judgment today.
However, it might still be challenged. There is concern that those who are disappointed today are going to try and take it to a higher court. What does this mean for the potential date of the coronation of the king?
I think it is their right to appeal. They can appeal up to the Constitutional Court, is their right. And I don't think this will affect the coronation of the king, because the judge has declared that Prince Zulu is undisputed successor to the Zulu throne. So it won't be interfering with the process of coronation.
Is there a date yet for that coronation?
I think all the eyes and ears were waiting for today's judgment. And now that the judgment has been passed, I think the arrangements for the ritual ceremonies will have to take place. And also after that, you will recall that the late King Zwelithini passed on in March last year. So it has been a year since the departing of His Majesty. So there are traditional rituals that has to be conducted, and some of the processes have already been initiated. So it's a matter of time that this coronation takes place.
Let's deal with another matter, and that is the authenticity of the signature on the late king's will. The court today has sort of put a halt to everything for a couple of weeks to get a handwriting expert to make sure that the signature is authentic. That could impact the claim for half of the king's estate. But talk to me traditionally what happens with assets. Is it divided equally amongst all the queens? Is this something that only the courts can deal with?
I think the traditional and customary law has principles that are laid down on how the estate is distributed. And in the modern time, I think there are regulations that regulate that. So it is not a matter of culture or tradition, but in the customary law, it is legislated how the estate is distributed amongst the wives.
Mm. How strong is the Zulu Royal House? I mean, if you think of, it's the 12th of March, as we were saying, since the passing of King Goodwill Zwelithini Kabeke Zulu, that was a massive loss for the Zulu kingdom. And then in April of that same year, his wife, Queen Mantfombi Dlamini, she died. And of course, that's the mother and father of Mrs. Zulu. So he's had a really heavy burden to carry, mourning both his parents while starting to assume the responsibilities of king, plus all the challenges. How do you think he's faring, and how much disunity is there still in the Zulu Royal House?
There's a lot of disunity, and I think the king has to reconcile with the members of the royal family, and he's got to reunite them and put the pain of losing both of his parents aside and try to move on to build a Zulu nation, because people in the kingdom of the Zulus were waiting to know who their king will be. Now that it has been declared and that King Misuzulu is the successor to the Zulu throne, I think he needs to focus on the idea of reassuring the Zulu nation and also restoring dignity of the nation and also unity within the royal family itself.
All right, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Professor Sihawukele Ngubani, he's a professor of African languages at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.